Hi, my name is Chuck Hayes. I am one of the principal educational consultants over in Ed Services. So let's talk about some of the techniques that I use personally when I'm working with customers or interacting with them either through our online classes or in person. And I start by mentioning two principles that undergird the technique that I'm going to suggest. So the first principle has to do with psychological theory. So psychologists will assert that all of us have a basic need to be understood. And I'm sure at this point you can start rolling your eyes and saying, well, yeah, I get that. We need to be understood, but what does that have to do with what we're discussing here? Well, what I mean is, I'm not talking about our ability to interpret our customers' words and what they're saying. I'm talking about our ability to step into their shoes and understand their job responsibilities, because that's what it all comes down to. So how well can you place yourself in the customer's position and see their job through their eyes? So that's principle number one, because that really goes to understanding them. And then number two is really about adult learning theory. And for that particular principle, we're talking about the fact that adults are very pragmatic when it comes to learning something. And they have a requirement that it has to fit, in our case, within their job responsibilities. I'm back to that whole job thing. So whatever I say to the customer, whatever we say to the customer, really has to be in the context of how we will help them do a better job. So let's take those two principles and combine them into a technique when we're working with a particular customer. And I'll use an example that just happened with me. It happened on site and it also happened online with a couple different types of customers. And so the example was, someone was saying to me at one point, so can I add this field or these fields to this report? So before I mention what I said, let's circle back to the principles. So first of all, I need to become an accountant in this example. It could have been fundraising. They need certain fields on their report. And secondly, I need to relate the answer to her job. So I started off by saying, we do have some restrictions on customizing this report, but before we look at workarounds, I love to throw around that word, before we look at workarounds, talk to me about how adding this field will help you do your job better. And in this one example, what I learned was that the customer was trying to create information that her boss would use to evaluate her work. And there were certain requirements that I didn't know about until I asked the question the way I did. So then we took time and I said, you know what? We can definitely accomplish your goal, letting your boss review your work. And what we're going to do is assemble some information in the form of a dashboard and a report, and I threw in one other piece. And then you can decide which combination would be the most efficient way to handle things. As it turned out, what she really wanted to do was take information and drop it into Excel. That was her preferred method. But of course, that wasn't part of her initial questions. Her question was, can I add this field to this report? And what we ended up with was a very simple way for her to refresh a dashboard, drop it into Excel, and give her boss exactly what she needed, or let her boss access it as well. So she was thrilled, but that's not where the conversation started. And it's all because I asked her about her job, and I focused all of my answers on helping her do a better job. So let's just kind of recap. A different approach would be if I'm starting out from scratch with a customer, I'm not getting a specific question up front. And one of the first things I always do in any conversation, any introduction with a customer is, you know what? I want to hear about your job responsibilities and what you do on a day-to-day basis. And I don't want to hear about our software. Use the language you use to describe your workflow, your job responsibilities. So then, as the customer starts talking, I start getting a picture in my head of the types of functionality that I need to assemble for them. And then, when I respond, I focus on, you know what I'm hearing is XYZ. I kind of repeat back a condensed version of what they said to me. And then I say, you know what? I think what we should do is put together several pieces of functionality. We'll look at them individually, but then we're going to assemble them into a flow that matches what you just told me about your job. I have now won over the customer to my side. And then I usually get some folks, as we start down that road, who start saying things like, well, what about this? And Okay, if this is happening, how do we deal with this? And I say, you know what? We will get there. I promise you. But what we're going to focus on first is what happens 80% of the time. So this example you just talked about, how often does it happen? Oh, well, okay, that might happen maybe, once every 6 months. Okay. Well, when you're designing a workflow, you focus on what you normally need to do. Then once we've got that understood and we agree that that's kind of working for you, then we talk about how do I handle those exceptions along the way. Again, I'm focusing everything on a very pragmatic, I'm going to help you get your job done in a better way by using our software. And as long as that's how I frame the answers, and I'm demonstrating that I really am working to understand their job, I really think those are the ingredients for award-winning customer service. And let me give you one more suggestion. I mentioned the whole psychological principle, but there's even more behind that. So I'm a big believer in personality theory and the Myers-Briggs type indicators. And one of the specialists in this field, Dr. Keirsey, Keirsey, has a website, keirsey.com, Keirsey. And he has some great information there, some tests you can take for yourself, but also, and he's written some publications. But if you can have some basic understandings of the Myers-Briggs type indicators, there are 4 major types, you'll be able to pretty quickly assess what someone's approach is. Then we can get past the whole judgmentalism that some of us, including myself, sometimes slip into. We say, oh gosh, they're just being so detail focused. Can we just get them back to the big picture? Well, there are certain personality types, that's all they see. So they're willing to be reminded that there is a bigger picture, but we have to make sure we're always including those details. So once you have a sense of that kind of information, you can kind of weave that into the conversation. So you start with what's most important to them and then kind of move them along in a direction so that they can be even more successful at their jobs.